Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. In this Kickstarter review video, we're going to look at Escape from Undergarden, a 5e-compatible adventure book designed by JVC Parry and Benoit de Bernardy. This video has been sponsored by the publisher, and a copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. So if you've been watching my live streams, you have seen me talk about Escape from Undergarden for a couple of weeks now, and now you finally get the review. This is a tier 2 adventure designed specifically for 5th level. I believe it goes up to 8 by the end. It is not quite as long as a Lost Mine of Bendover, but I think it probably ends up coming close. It just lacks a single big dungeon crawl. Instead, it's kind of a great example of a miniature hex crawl in the verdant demiplane of the Undergarden. So this takes place around the small town of Therol, and I really like the design of this town. It's really cute. It's got a small town vibe. Very much is what reminded me of Phandalin, in that, you know, every shop is detailed and they all have fun little NPCs you can talk to, and they've all got their own little quirks, and they all have little side quests, which all basically have to branch off of the main quest. And it's very much a logging, you know, hunter, classic forest camp. The whole thing feels like a setup for a Feywild adventure, right? You go in, you're looking for this missing sister. She ends up going to this town specifically because they hold this festival for hunting down this golden stag that you're supposed to be able to find, this legendary creature. And it just feels like, and of course, you know, hunters and trappers and things in the town and encroaching on the, you know, the wild. It feels like we're setting up for a Feywild adventure, and yet that's not entirely what this is. In fact, I believe the Undergarden technically doesn't have anything to do with the Feywild. It's just its own demi-plane of forest action. But before that, the adventure kind of throws a little bit of a twist at us, because it introduces this villainous druid faction called the Deep Root Ring, and a very just zealous about keeping out, you know, anybody out of the woods and trying to maintain the sanctity and the nature and the wild. And you can see where there's obviously they're butting heads with the townsfolk of Therol. And I really like the design, by the way. This dude is so gnarly, literally gnarly, with all his gnarled plant bits and things. Eric Blackthorn. I like the twist, however, that yes, they did end up basically kidnapping the sister you're looking for, although the sister is supposed to be this very competent, like, hunter of herself, but these druids just, you know, they've got all kinds of the plant powers, and they kind of own these woods and really want to keep people out of all their sacred sites. And they throw people into this magical demiplane that they've discovered called Undergarden, which is attached to their hideout. But I like the twist that the druids aren't necessarily just evil. Like, you can bang down their door and start fighting them. There's scripted encounters where you can come across them, but every single step of the way, the designers make sure to allow a more maybe role-playing-y party to just kind of talk with them and discuss things, especially if you have like a druid in your party. And even says, you know, mentions the fact that the Deep Root Ring may not immediately want to fight a party that has a druid, and they recognize some kind of kinship there. So I appreciate that even all the way through this hideout, you could still handle them socially if you wanted to, which is, I think, a really interesting option versus just banging down the doors. Of course, it's, you know, a room-to-room combat dungeon crawl if you want it to be, or it could devolve. You know, you could start off with a social scene and then go into combat. So the surrounding woods has scripted encounters, which I like to see. It's not just the encounter table and then the actual little dungeon crawl hideout. Now, what's interesting is, even if you do solve it socially, which it's very challenging to do that because this dude is the most militant of zealous druids, it almost doesn't matter in terms of the rest of the story, which is nice, because then the DM feels like you can solve it socially, because they've already thrown the sister Mirren into the Undergarden demiplane, and there is no escape. So the only way to go get her is to go in there yourself, and then now the party has to figure out how to escape. So you either end up going in there on your own will, or maybe you're defeated by the druids and they, you know, turn you unconscious and knock you unconscious and then throw you in there, or you battle your way in there and you know, find the notes or interrogate somebody and realize you have to go in there. So either way, we're still on track for the story to end up into the 3rd chapter of Undergarden, which all of that I just talked about, the town, and then the forest, and then the Deep Root Ring druids, is all 5th level stuff. There's also a nice little side content where you can have like this Gaston figure, this jackass noble, like show up with the stag, and of course it's just painted with gold paint, and it's a really fun little social scene you can deal with. All of that is 5th level, and then once you make it into Undergarden, we advance into level 6. Undergarden is awesome. So this is the page I wanted. It is a miniature hex crawl and it kind of accounts for a lot of things, like there's encounters everywhere, there's adventure locations everywhere. If you have too many long rests here, you slowly turn into a plant, so there's a little bit of a sense of urgency and to keep your players from just kind of gaming the system and just continually long resting, because it's not really a safe place here, but you obviously are going to be here long enough where they're going to have to long rest at some point. So in terms of creating kind of a tightly packed, limited, but still worth enough content to do a hex crawl, I think it succeeds very well. The other thing it does very cool is that immediately upon reaching the entrance, you realize what you have to do to escape. So you can't just go up and escape. The way is barred magically. It's its own little magical demi-plane. Instead, you have to locate 4 keys, which are surrounded around the areas. Classic open world game design here. But you have this sundial, and you, the players, can manipulate this sundial to actually change the seasons of the entire demi-plane that you're in. So it starts off on summer, and you just click that thing, and it instantly becomes spring, winter, or fall as you click it around. And as the DM, you get to change which encounters appear depending on the season, and it alters some of the adventure locations. For example, one of the first keys that you can find is the autumn key, which is hidden inside of a tree. And there are little like fun, riddles and things that kind of give the player some clue as to where these things are, so they're not just going around in the dark. But for example, to get the autumn key, it has a clue that says, "Beware the falling leaves, the bark hides the key." And it's in this evergreen oak tree that never loses its leaves. So it changes, it stays green, and it's got all these other trees that are also green. So clever players might switch it to fall, in which case you would see some of the trees begin to turn colors, and then that one's only going to be green, so that's my tree. The problem is, in the fall, all these falling leaves turn into dryads and can attack the party. So the party could then think, well, let's click it over to winter, and then we can go in. There won't be any leaves. There's no dryads. Then we just have to fight the actual treant that comes alive, but it's still a much easier battle. So it's kind of like that, where the players are supposed to be very proactive, and there's not really a specific puzzle area, but it's like the whole place is a puzzle, because you get to choose which of the seasons that you'd want to switch for each encounter. And you may be thinking, well, gosh, that seems like a pain in the ass to constantly go back and forth. And that's the interesting thing, is it almost is. There are some fast travel locations, which I think is pretty fun, and another good, open world game design checkbox. There's certain fairy rings that basically, once you've reached one, you can then teleport back to one you've previously been to. So that allows you to helpfully go back, and once you realize, okay, gosh, I don't want to deal with the Remoraz, so why don't we click it over to summer, and that of course makes it retreat back in deeper into its cave, and now we can go grab, almost like classic adventure game design at that point. And now we can go grab the item we need without even having to battle the damn thing. So a really, really cool feature. And that I just love the fact that it works for the entire demi-plane, and it can really alter the different adventure locations, as well as all of the, I kind of skipped over the encounter tables here, but as you notice, there are a different encounter table for every single season, which is pretty fun. The only one that I believe remains the same, aside from just running into friendly wildlife, is Fendragal, which is the young green dragon, who is kind of an optional battle, but if you do fight him, then instead of rolling a d10 for encounters, you're only supposed to roll a d6. Like the entire demi-plane just becomes easier to navigate. So it's interesting in that it's a tough, obviously, battle, and he doesn't actually even guard any of the keys. They're in other locations. And yet he's got a lot of treasure, and then you can really make your whole stay a little bit easier if you do end up going after the green dragon. And there's a lot of little, social scenes you can deal with. There's a hag that stole an egg from a giant eagle's nest. There's a little fairy that you can try to deal with socially, or you can upset her allergies by going in the spring, and that's the way to maybe gain advantage against her. And others are just more combat related, like you have to fight a bunch of phase spiders, or there's the Remoraz. There's this giant hibernating bear king, which has to deal with which season you're gonna end up approaching him. And in terms of the cave, is this water, what kind of level is the water at, depending on which season you're in. So I think the whole thing is a really, really neat idea. That whole concept of manipulating that sundial and changing the seasons and really changes the entire thing. But importantly, it's the players that do it, right? It's not just like some scripted event that happens. It's the players that get to choose how best to do it. And that's a really cool thing that really gives them the power to decide how this entire rest of the adventure operates, and determines how willing they are to have fun with that and really test the system and switch it around, versus we're just going to brute force everything in this one season and not really care, because technically you can do that. You can basically brute force your way through everything and have a little bit more of a difficult time with it. My only really complaint with this adventure, which, by the way, if you've looked through here, absolutely amazing production values. Holy crap. Not that I expect anything less from one of Parry's Kickstarter products, but just incredible full color map design and just really nice art. In fact, I think a few of these are actual placeholder art. This is an early Kickstarter preview copy that I was given, but just absolutely gorgeous looking product. But my only complaint is it doesn't have a final climax, really. So you gather all the keys, and which is a great, again, I love that concept of having to go get things in order to unlock a thing. It gives the players a good excuse to go around to certain areas and just explore more of that content. But once they get all of those things and open it up, it just unlocks the entrance and you're out. And then you're at the epilogue, where it just determines, hey, basically, how did you work this kind of social problem where it's the townsfolk and this zealous druid faction, and then hopefully you save the sister, who is back at the phase spiders, and she's partially suffering from the debilitating turning into a plant thing. So there is a nice little epilogue bit on there, but it lacks a good final climactic thing, because you just don't know which order, who knows which ones they're going to do last, right? Because it just depends on the keys. They could do one of the easier keys at the end, plug that key in as their fourth key, and then they make it outside, and that's the kind of the end of the adventure. So it really feels like it lacks some kind of big epic ending. It doesn't necessarily need a big boss fight, but I feel like, man, you could have really done something cool with the whole seasonal change thing here too, is maybe the boss is something to do with like 4 different seasons and has 4 different modes, or maybe the players can click it and actually change, this boss thing to different modes or something. I keep, again, video game background, I keep thinking boss battle, but I guess we don't necessarily have to do that. But I feel like there should have been something to punctuate the finding of the 4th key, and like right before leaving or something, maybe you have to do something else. Otherwise, it does feel anticlimactic at the end. Or, maybe the dragon somehow should have been like it swoops down at the end and says no one can leave or something like that. That probably would have been fine too, if the dragon just ends up becoming a big thing at the end. But otherwise, it leaves me kind of anticlimactic, to where if I wanted to run this adventure, I would run it 90% from the book. I think all of it is just really, really good content, and I really enjoyed the, fairly simplistic story, but the hex crawl, the demiplane, the changing the seasons, all of that works really, really well for me. The only part that doesn't is I feel like there needed to be some kind of big, boss battle thing at the end, and I would have loved to either take advantage of the seasonal thing or just use this green dragon as the big fight, unless they already dealt with the dragon, in which case, what do we do then? Like, we need kind of a backup plan for that. But that's honestly, I think, my only complaint going in. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Escape from Undergarden. Pro, this adventure features a superb balance of combat, exploration, and role-playing opportunities. Really, really, really fantastic in how it balances all those things. As I mentioned, like, in fact, that's one of my pros, is the evil druid faction can be dealt with socially or through combat. So you've got this entire, you think that's what you're coming up against, and it turns out you can even deal with them socially. The town is obviously one big social thing, and then there's still role-playing and social opportunities in Undergarden, but Undergarden is a lot of the exploration aspect, because boy, you've got their own hex crawl. You can, tell them all these markers. They can easily, and it does a smart thing where early on you can crest, an area, climb a big tree, and then you can see all these notable regions and kind of, put them on your proverbial mini map, and then your players can go there. So obviously checks a huge box off of exploration. And then, of course, very few D&D 5e adventures have any problem with injecting combat into any of the adventures, but there are plenty of good opportunities there. Pro, Thorol is a lovely small town with enjoyable NPCs. I think that can't be understated enough, is to have those nice little, it's not necessarily the big quest hub that Phandalin was, and yet there are some fun little side quests where, like, you gather mushrooms or whatever it is for the herbalist, which of course those can be found in Undergarden, retrieve the magic bow back from the Deeproot Ring druids who confiscated it from the Fletcher. Everything is tied into pretty much the main quest, so you don't ever have to go like completely off of the beaten path to go do a side quest. That would have been pretty nice to inject if there were some additional content there, but otherwise, I think it does a really good job of having just enough of that stuff, basically. Having enough of those NPCs and having most of them be worth talking to without having this huge town full of things that you don't really care about and your players aren't going to care about. That's what I like to see. Give me just, half a dozen or fewer stores and NPCs that I can deal with that have relevant information or quests or have a reason for visiting, and that's going to help flesh the town out to a really fun degree. Pro, manipulating seasons to alter the entire demiplane is a memorable feature. That is the entire feature, basically, but it's what really sets this apart from other dungeons, from other kind of Fey-themed dungeons. Oh, this one's not Feywild at all. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that. It doesn't have anything to do with the Feywild, and yet you think magical dungeon crawling that has to do with the woods is kind of that. But the whole altering the seasons thing is really, really cool. It has its own, each one has its own encounters. It switches all the locations around. That is such a cool idea. And then the fact that you have to go gather all of those keys as part of the main quest in order to solve this dungeon is really fun. And of course, pro professional design and layout with beautiful original artwork and full color battle maps. I don't think every single area is given a battle map, but most of them that do require or are going to probably have some kind of fight involved does have this really good battle map art to it that I love. My only con, as I mentioned, is that I think it lacks a satisfying climax at the end, which is a bummer. I think there are several different avenues the designers could have done to give us some kind of nice finale or epic finale to kind of put a good tie a ribbon around Undergarden, but instead you just kind of get your keys and end up leaving, and that just feels like a bit of a bummer to me. Final verdict: Escape from Undergarden takes a classic forest adventure and injects a well-designed hex-crawl demiplane of magic and exploration while keeping the narrative tightly focused on the players and their choices. Thank you, everyone, for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com, and you can watch more reviews and follow our own 5e adventures here on my YouTube channel and support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.